This is Creepy and Geeky. Welcome. I'm your host, Robert, and on this episode, I'm beginning my Friday the 13th series, taking a look at the whole franchise, 2 movies at a time. And for this episode, I have the extreme pleasure of being joined by Ted Geoghegan. Ted is the writer and director of the films We Are Still Here and Mohawk, and the co-writer of Satanic Panic. Welcome to the show, Ted.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you on.
Well, if the
Go ahead.
easiest way to get me on a podcast on Friday the 13th.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, no, I put it out there to my followers, people that follow me on Twitter, and asked for people to come on. And Kat Hughes, who's been on the show a couple of times now, she tagged you and said, "Hey, what about you?" And you graciously agreed to come on. So,
I said she saw photos of my Jason tattoos.
oh,
So yeah, so I figured she knew I was obsessive enough.
well, while I was, I've heard of your name. I've had heard of We Are Still Here numerous times before that, and I finally got a chance to watch it just before this. I didn't know much about you up until that point, and so when doing a little light research, I found out that you are a huge fan of Friday the 13th Part 2.
That I am. That is my baby.
So that's awesome. You're coming on for the right episode, and this will be a fun talk.
Perfecto. Yeah.
All right. So let's go ahead.
I was just gonna say, one of the things that I love so much about Friday the 13th Part 2 is, it really does create the vast majority of the mythology for the series, and I feel like it often gets overlooked for that. And as a purist of the Paramount 8, that's where I draw the line at the series. I like to believe there are only 8 Friday the 13th films. Ending with Jason Takes Manhattan. After that, they can all suck an egg. But
okay.
Yeah, it creates the mythology. Yeah, it creates the mythology for the series, and I love it. And I actively try to remind people of the mythology that it sets down, because it brings up some interesting points, which I will most certainly be bringing up as we chat.
Definitely. And I also heard that you've attempted yourself to try and get some Friday the 13th movie going.
I've never actively attempted to try to get a Friday the 13th film going, just because it's studio, and I don't work on the studio level, at least not these days.
Right.
I love the series, and in my wildest dreams, I would love to work on a Friday film. It sounds like a blast. I just it was mired in all those lawsuits for so long, to keep the series from ever having anything happen. And then now that that's taken care of, which is amazing. I certainly didn't think it was ever going to happen in Sean Cunningham or Victor Miller's lifetime. I legitimately thought one of them was going to have to pass away before anything was going to happen. But the fact that they came to an agreement, and now we're getting this new Crystal Lake series. Which I'm very excited and cautious about it, because I think the people behind it are fantastic. But I think it's going to muck up the mythology, and I really love the original mythology, and it's so simple. And I feel like anytime you are like, let's turn it into episodic television, it becomes needlessly complex. Bates Motel is a neat show, but the story of Norman Bates didn't necessarily need to be 4 seasons of complexity. It's just he was a nutcase with his dead mom upstairs.
Right.
So So sometimes less is more, and in the case of Friday the 13th, in the case of all slashers, I think less is more. I mean, even some of the most clever slashers of all time, like Scream, are
Yeah.
still relatively like very simple. Like they're very simple, easy to digest. They've got some fun twists and turns in them that are kind of like Giallo inspired, but
Yes.
or
Yeah.
beyond that, they're not these like deep dives with countless switchbacks. It's one of the things I actually didn't care so much for about the Friday the 13th remake, reboot, whatever you want to call it, requel, the one with Derek Mears. Um,
Right.
like I think Derek's amazing. I think he's actually a very good Jason. But I thought that the film was just needlessly complex. And it's like
Mm.
Friday the 13th movies are some horny kids going to camp and they get stabbed in the whatever and drop dead, and that's the movie. And they're a blast and they're comfort food, and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I can understand that. Yeah. I
But
mean, I like, don't get me wrong, I like the remake. I think that it's generally okay. And tends to be, maybe because it's newer and glossier and everything like that. But I love the series as a whole. So warts and all that, and the bad ones, it's kind of like with Scream for me. Scream is one of those franchises that I love, even though I don't love every single one of them equally. I still love them all. And
sure.
Friday the 13th has been that
Yeah,
way for me as well.
that's how I've always felt about the Paramount 8. Like 1 through
Yeah.
8,
Yeah.
the Paramount films. Warts and all. Like there are certainly moments in those first 8 movies that are cringy, but they're my cringe. They're the cringe I
Right.
grew up on.
Yeah.
And once it gets into Jason Goes to Hell and Jason X and Freddy versus Jason, they just lost me. And the thing is, I'm glad those movies have fans. I'm glad that people enjoy them. There's enough room in the
Right.
world for everybody to like whatever they want.
Yeah.
They're very not for me. The
Okay.
the kind of simplicity, the simplicity that was the Friday series just completely was absent from those films. Like
Right.
Jason
Yeah, I
Goes to
can see
Hell
that.
just was so needlessly complex, and it's The Hidden. Like I wasn't signed up to watch The Hidden. I was signed up to watch Jason, and there's virtually no Jason in the movie.
Right.
And it's messy, and Jason X, like it's got some fun kills in it, but like it just looks like an NBC sci-fi show from the late 90s. Like it doesn't do anything for me. And Freddy versus Jason, I think is like it's amazing because like the talent behind that movie was so massive, and I just think it misses on everything. Like I think
Oh
it
wow.
misses on the big battle that you're waiting for. I think the kill, it's like CGI all over the place. Like every single kill looks hokey. And the movie's ADR to shit. Oh my god, watch it and listen to the ADR in the movie. It's like every other scene, it'll be like a street, and you'll just hear one of the characters go, maybe we should go down this street. Like it was obvious, like they'd shot the movie and they were like, oh man, I don't think people know that these characters are supposed to go down the street. Let's bring the actor back to just say one line into a microphone. But like, I feel like 90% of that movie is characters off screen, like giving a line that clearly was recorded like a year after they made the movie. So the whole thing is like they fight Freddy and Freddy falls on the ground, and all of a sudden you hear somebody off screen go, is he dead? Like, oh my god, like no, he's not. That's Fred. Like it's
That
just,
sounds like
yeah.
studio
Last
interference
time I watched
too.
it on,
I mean,
I
just
don't
that.
know, and
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
it
I'm just saying, like,
absolutely
it
could
might
have
be,
been like somebody
but yeah.
going,
Yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, no, I would be very curious, and I'd be very curious to see what the backstory was behind it, because like
Right. Right.
Ronnie Yu is amazing. Like he's an incredible director, and like Bride of Chucky is
Yeah.
one of like the best examples of like a great, when a slasher series goes big and studio and does it like perfectly. Like
Right. Right.
Bride of Chucky's arguably the best film in the Chucky series. Like it's so good. And yeah, I just not in it for Freddy versus Jason. Just did not work for me. I also I admit I was kind of in that camp too. That like I was a bit bummed that Kane wasn't back as
Yeah.
Jason. You know, like I don't necessarily think Kane is the best Jason. I think he's good. I think all of them have their merits.
Right,
Um,
right.
but I think it was a real bummer. I think it was a real bummer that after all the films he had done, that with this big studio film, it was a real opportunity for him. And I just think it was a shame. And of course, the argument being like, oh, they wanted somebody taller. It's like, you know that Tom Cruise is like 3'2" and he keeps getting work. Like it's fine if Jason isn't tall. You know, movie magic allows Jason to be any size they want.
Yeah,
You know, Kane
exactly.
Hodder can be the size of a skyscraper if they actually wanted him to be. So
Yeah.
I did think that was a bit of a bummer, but
Yeah.
what you gonna do? We like I said, I'm glad that there are fans of it. But
Yeah.
rather than me rail on the non-Friday films that I am not a big fan of, I'm here to talk about the ones I do love.
Indeed. Yes. So let's go ahead and jump into
So,
Friday the 13th, the original, the one that
God,
started it all.
it's about as good as they get. Starting at
Oh yeah.
1958. Oh, it's my favorite. I love the cold open in 1958 with
Yeah.
Barry and Claudette, the two counselors, like getting hot
Yeah.
and horny, sneaking away, singing "Kumbaya," and Tom Dooley and all that. They sneak upstairs, try to get their horny on, get stabbed. It's such a great like simple opening, and it's I won't say it's a great misdirect, but it really does set the stage for like what is going on, because
Right.
it's 20 years before the movie takes place. And
Right.
so now when the movie starts and you got all these kids and people start getting killed, you're like, well, it can't be one of the kids because this killer has been around for 20 years. But then it's like, oh, or is it a copycat killer? Is one of the kids just copying whoever killed those kids back in 58? It's
Right.
just, it's a very very simple setup that absolutely does what it's supposed to do, which is just like gets the gears turning. And for as amazing as it is when Pamela Voorhees shows up, you know, in the third act, and you know, does her weird speech, "I'm a friend of the Christies," like
Yeah.
it's so great and it's so charming, but at the same time, like we all look back on that and we're like, oh my god, it's crazy, oh my god, the mom was the killer. But if you were to do that in a slasher movie today, you would get raked over the coals. Like she's not just like oh my god, the mom, she's a non-character until that moment.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it would literally be the equivalent of like in a Scream movie, if like in the final moments they lifted the mask off the killer and it was someone we had not only never met but never even heard of for the
Yeah.
entire film. Like it was just like, hey, I'm Frank, I run the hardware store down the street, and everybody's like, so why are you doing the killing? Oh, because somebody killed my kid. Like that's it. Like
Yeah.
there's no way to figure out who the killer is in the first movie because you're not even given the opportunity to consider her one of the
Yeah.
options for the killer.
Yeah. Because I don't
And
even think
and the
she's
thing is, like,
mentioned
we
at
look
all in
back,
there.
never. She is
Yeah.
never mentioned in any
Yeah.
capacity, like nothing. And I do find that like I love it. And that's we're talking warts and all earlier. Those are the sort of warts and all that I love, is that the movie is well written. It's got all the right scares, it's got all the right beats. And we look
Right.
back on the reveal of Pamela as this like awesome thing. Oh my god, it was the mom. Well, who's mom? What are we even talking about? Like we
Yeah.
don't know. The only reason we know she's Jason's mom is the
Because she
final
tells
act
us.
of the first movie, because she tells us in the last
Yeah.
like 10 minutes of the movie all this stuff. And so I do really find it to just be such a charmer in that sense, that it's eye rolling and wonderful all in one.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think you look back on it with those rose-colored nostalgia glasses for sure, and go, "Oh my God, it's so great, it's so perfect." But yeah, you bring up a good point that up until that point, we've never seen her. She's never mentioned. We have no clue who this character is. Yeah, if anybody did that in a modern slasher or anything, they'd be laughed out of the
Oh,
theater.
a
So
100%. It'd be like, what on earth?
Yeah.
were you thinking by doing this? Like it's practically absurd, but
Yeah.
there is great charm in that. And I'm sorry, you said you had caught We Are Still Here. You
I
were able to
have.
check it out.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so one of the things with We Are Still Here, and is when we made it, I had told all the actors that I wanted the film to be a melodrama because it is an acting style that we don't see anymore. Because it's considered antiquated. We think of it as like soap opera y, or things like that.
Right.
And but the thing is, like most of the horror movies that we grew up on, if you're similar age as I, like grew up in the 70s and 80s, even into the
Yeah.
90s, had this air of melodrama about them, especially into like the early mid 80s, like 83, 84. We started seeing more naturalistic acting in films. Even in the Friday
Yeah.
series, we start to see the acting start to become somewhat more quote unquote realistic. I'd
Right.
say around the time of Final Chapter, like when you've got Corey Feldman and Crispin Glover and people like that,
Yeah.
who they're playing these characters that actually feel very like real. They feel very lived in. I mean, they're quirky and weird, but they're not melodramatic. Whereas if you watch, especially the first two Fridays, even the third one a bit, they're very melodramatic. Every single character is like these huge gesticulations with their arms, and everything is like, woe is me. Oh my God. Everything is
Yeah.
huge and dramatic. And, but there's such charm in that. And I really love melodrama because it reminds me so much of so many of the movies that I grew up loving. To me, melodrama doesn't scream soap operas. To me, it screams Fulci movies. To me it screams the old Friday the 13th, so the first few
Right.
Friday the 13th films. Like, I absolutely love. I mean, there are moments in the first Friday the 13th where the characters are like playing around, being goofy, and they'll do things like put a hand to their forehead and like pretend to faint back onto a couch.
Right.
Like they're almost mocking how melodramatic they are in the film. You know,
Right.
the moment where the guy kills the snake, and the other characters like are all like, oh gosh. I mean, the delivery of the lines is silly. It is legitimately
Yeah.
silly, but it also like it's great, and I love it. And it was one of those things that because we don't use melodrama very often, a lot of actors are a little nervous about doing it, and there certainly was nerves on set for We Are Still Here. Like all
Yeah.
the actors were like, wait, okay, like how are we doing this? And I was like, we want to do it big. We want everything to feel a little antiquated almost, like the We Are Still Here is set in 1979, and I thought, like, what if this movie was shot in 1979? Like,
Yeah.
this would be the acting style. Like, this is how these characters would be going about these things. And I really wanted to try to land that, and God willing, I did. But it, you know,
Yeah.
it really it's an homage I don't talk about a lot when talking about We Are Still Here. But I do relate a lot of the acting style in We Are Still Here to the acting style in the first two Fridays.
Interesting. Yeah. No, I did think that, the acting in We Are Still Here, it was I didn't see it as melodramatic, and maybe just because we don't see that much anymore. And it didn't come off that way. It definitely, there were a few times where um that, yeah, definitely the performances felt a little over the top, in a good way, not in a like they were
Mm-hmm.
trying too hard way, but especially like Larry Fessenden's performance.
Yeah.
He was, I haven't seen a lot that he's been in, but this was by far my favorite of his performances so far.
Oh, I
um
can't wait for you to see him in my new movie coming out early next year. He
all right, is
is
that the Brooklyn 45?
amazing. Brooklyn 45. Yeah, he is
Yeah.
next level good, man. I'm so proud to have had him in this film in Brooklyn 45. It's
Okay.
yeah, totally different beast, yet kind of the same beast as We Are Still Here. But
Interesting.
Yeah, talk about that a little later. But
Yeah, definitely.
but
But yeah,
yeah,
no,
man.
I definitely can see that in these first three Fridays, like you said, because that was something that I thought was interesting too about we're specifically talking about these two, but number three kind of goes along with it, that the first three feel very and take this for what it's worth because I haven't seen a lot of Giallo, but they feel very Giallo like because throughout most of
Oh
it,
yeah.
we are seeing just hints of the killer. Even Jason in two and three, you're only seeing him once in a while, and not even seeing him. You're seeing his hands, you're seeing his feet. You never see him fully until the
The
end.
classic Giallo moves. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the
And
classic
so,
Giallo moves of the hands and the feet and things like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So,
Yeah.
I noticed that
Well,
was an
yeah.
interesting take that they were doing with that. Go ahead.
Oh, 100%. And honestly, like it's with I'm sure I'll get back to the first one, but in Friday 2, I mean,
Yeah.
the film is in many ways it's a remake of Bava's Bay of Blood,
Okay.
which I don't know if you've caught that film, but if you
I
haven't,
have. Yeah.
definitely seek it out ASAP. Okay, great. It's got so many of the same beats. It's got the same tension. It's practically got the same score. It's
I'm
ridiculous.
gonna have to rewatch
And
that for sure
like
now.
like 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 4 out of the 7 kills are literally the exact same kills. Even like the couple getting impaled in bed, like exactly the
Oh
same.
wow.
Like it's amazing. It's amazing. And consider, I mean, those movies are a decade apart. That somebody didn't sue them, and we were like, dude,
Yeah.
you just took like 60% of our movie and made a Friday movie out of it. Like it's really wild how much of it is from that. And so obviously, like the creators of now talking to, like the creators of two were like, yes, like we are definitely talking about Giallos here. Like that is
Yes.
definitely the mood. Yeah. And I mean, so one of the things that I do love harping on, and I really hope you give it to your guests if they don't feel the same way, your future guests for the upcoming episodes. So at the end of the original Friday the 13th, Alice has killed Mrs. Voorhees. She decapitates her on the banks of Crystal Lake,
Right.
and rolls out into the canoe. And she's out in the canoe, and she's laying there, and all of a sudden, baby Jason jumps out of the lake, yanks her under, and then the next thing we know, she's waking up. She's having a panic attack, and she's, where's the boy? And there was no boy. Then he's still out there. The end, and we've
Yeah.
got the end of the film. Well, the thing is, like, I mean, there's the argument of like, well, how did he go from being like a little boy to being a full grown man between the first and the second film? Well, the answer is it's so obvious, and not only is it obvious, it's directly stated in the second
Mm-hmm.
film. First of all,
Yep.
it's obvious that she was having a nightmare, that
Yes.
baby Jason didn't actually jump out of a lake and attack her.
Yeah.
And I feel that the creators of, especially the Paramount 8, they knew this, because think of how many of the other movies end with nightmares that are clearly nightmares, like part 3, where she looks up and she sees Jason in the cabin and he bursts out the door, and then all of a sudden he's not there.
Yeah.
Even in part 8 with Rennie constantly having these like nightmares of Jason. So there's this ongoing theme of the final girls having nightmares about Jason. So like let's just say we're agreeing, at least for the time being, that the moment at the end of the first movie was a nightmare, not just based on the fact that it obviously was, but the
Yeah.
fact that throughout the series they repeatedly reiterate that the final girls dream of Jason. Well, it's like the second movie starts up, it's 2 months later. Alice is super fucked up. She's a mess because of everything that happened.
Right.
She's doing her thing, and she's in her apartment having fun, opens up the fridge, there's Pamela's head, and Jason shanks her with the ice pick.
Yeah.
So then it jumps 5 years later. Like
5 years.
there's the
Yeah.
huge jump in time right there. It does the 5 years later bit. So it's like now we're 5 years later and we're at the other camp. It's no longer, you know, camp. I mean, it's Camp Crystal Lake, but just popped out of my head. Damn it! What is the name of that? The center that they're at. Anywho, it'll pop into
Yeah.
my head when I'm not thinking of it, because that is always how it works.
Right.
But you've got the camp counselors. They're hanging out. They're training. They're doing their thing on the other side of the camp, and they constantly talk about like, oh, remember 5 years ago all those kids got killed on the other side of the camp. There's even the couple that's like, let's sneak over there and fuck where kids got killed, which I think dark children.
Yeah.
But everybody's got these different plans and everything. But there's this one moment in particular that I always bring up. It's when they go to the casino bar, which is the gorgeous location that they found, burnt down very shortly after they shot the film. And it's one of those things like Friday fans are always like, oh my God, I'd love to drink some beers there. But it's like burnt down very, very shortly after they shot there. But they're in that bar and Ginny gives that speech. And the speech is basically like, she's not giving that speech to her friends. She's giving that speech to the audience. To the audience. She's giving that speech to the theater goers, where she says, what if Jason didn't die back in 1958? What if he pulled himself from the water on the far side of the lake and grew up some kind of feral madman, some kind of lunatic? Like, and she gives this she is explaining what happened. And then it's not only that, but it's directly correlating with, we're seeing Jason's house for the first time. Like, he's not some sort of supernatural being. He is a crazy homeless man who is living out in the woods. I won't say he's homeless. He actually built himself a rather nice little shack. But like he's built this shack.
It's even got a toilet.
So. It's got a toilet. Exactly. No water, but oh God, that thing must be a mess after 20 years. But to me, that is such a an obvious plot point that is constantly overlooked, because then it becomes like, oh, well, you know, Jason's this monster who can't be killed. Jason, like, he drowned in the lake and then like his soul came up, or like he drowned in the lake and then he became a monster. Like, no, it's very clear what happened to Jason. And as we see in the flashbacks in the films, we see that Jason had a developmental disability. Like, we see that there was something up with him, so that he was having trouble like understanding. You know, even in the first film, Mrs. Voorhees calls him special, I believe. She says like he was special. That he was slow, and he was this little kid who was just at camp, and he was the cook's son. And the shitty counselors weren't looking. The other kids were teasing him, and he got pushed into the lake. He fell into the lake. He tried to go swimming, whatever the case may be. And as he flailed out in that lake and went under, everybody's like, he's gone. He died. And Mrs. Voorhees went insane. But what she didn't realize, again, is that he crawled his way from the lake on the other side of the lake. And then she also explains, because what if Jason, living alone for 20 years out there in the middle of nowhere, suddenly one night 5 years ago heard sounds, heard scuffles, heard screaming, and he was drawn out of the darkness to the other side of the lake where Camp Crystal Lake was, and he witnessed the first time he's ever like, oh look, it's people. He looks out and he sees his mom get decapitated by a camp counselor. Like, that's literally the first thing he sees.
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's why he's a lunatic. That's why he's a lunatic. Yeah. Like, he is, it's all there. And I always am surprised, because I constantly talk to people who are like, I don't think that's it, man. And I'm like, what other option is there when we're talking about,
out
like,
in the second movie?
It's completely laid out. The mythology of Jason is right there. And not only that, but at the end of part 2, Jason gets the machete to the shoulder, really horrible wound. He goes right through his shoulder blade, everything like that. Now, we can argue, like, you did. You're like, if I got a machete through my shoulder that basically went about 6 inches down into my chest,
Yeah.
I'm gonna call it quits. I'm just gonna I'm gonna do like the in nomine patri and just lay down and go sleep forever. But Jason is this big hulking lunatic who is powered by rage.
Yeah.
So like it's the whole thing of like, you know, when a mom can lift the car off the little kid.
Yeah,
Like
it's adrenaline. Like, yeah, and fear.
He is not gonna let this get him down. So then part 3, Jason's like, whatever. I got this shoulder wound. Fuck it. I'm just going to keep partying. So he keeps partying and he's going nuts. And at the end of 3, he gets whacked in the head with an axe. And you're like, okay, now he's dead. But, and I mean, you know, not to sound too silly, but like, you know, people have survived traumatic brain injury. You know, it's possible. And
it is possible.
It's one of those things where, yeah, like I mean, the Phineas Gage story about the railroad foreman who had a giant iron rod that shot all the way through his head.
Yeah,
like dude was fine. I mean, I won't say he was fine. He was kind of an asshole apparently after the fact, but he was mostly fine.
Yeah.
So now Jason's got a bum shoulder and he's got this dumb, stupid, gaping hole in his head, and then they're like, oh, he's dead. He's dead. Take him to the morgue. They take him to the morgue at the beginning of 4, and he gets up again. And he's like, no,
he just needed a break.
I'm not dead. I'm ready to kill some more. Yeah, exactly. He just needed to rest. He laid on the slab for a little bit. He gets up. But the thing is, in 4, there's 4 is called the final chapter. That is the movie where Jason dies.
Yeah.
There is it is the end of the road for Jason. And at the end of that movie, Tommy kills him, butchers him to a pulp, to the point where you're like, Jason is filleted. He is 100% dead. And parts 2, 3, and 4 all take place within about a week.
Within a couple of days.
You know, so it's really like within a couple of days. Yeah. I mean, you see, because at the beginning of each one, you see them cleaning up like the previous night's massacre. At the beginning of the next one. Like it's like beginning of 3, they're like, oh, we're wheeling bodies away. Beginning of 4, we're wheeling bodies away.
Yeah.
So like clearly these movies are taking place within like a really, really short amount of time. And so when you think about that, you're like, okay, so now we're thinking about Jason witnessed his mom get killed 5 years ago. About 2 months later, he tracks down Alice, kills her. Yeah. Drags her body back to his cabin, and he's just like, you know what? I'm good. I'm fine. I did what I need to do. I killed that woman who killed my mom. Then 5 years later, he's like, oh my God, there are kids back at the lake. Okay, that's it. You know what? Like, I'm sick of it. And goes out.
Well, and this time they're back at his side of the lake because that's the opposite side of Crystal Lake. And so now they're on his turf, where his house is near.
They're in his house.
So,
yeah, exactly. They are in his house. And he's like, no, this is not how we're doing this. Yeah. So over the course of a week, you've got this developmentally disabled rage machine who's like, that's it. Fuck this. Taking care of everybody. And he does. I mean, he goes bonkers. And at the end of that week, this giant killing spree, he gets killed. He finally gets killed. I won't say finally gets killed because it actually his killing spree while alive is not that long of a thing. You know, it's not like, you know, the Zodiac killer who's killing for years. We're talking about a guy who killed for like 6 days.
He's got a high body count, but it was a short time.
We've got 5. Right. And it's like, then we've got 5 where we don't have Jason, but we still have Tommy, you know, like, and then 6, there's a reason why 6 is called Jason Lives. Because that's the first time Jason comes back from the dead. And the Tommy Jarvis trilogy, I think, you know, kind of tucked in there is so interesting because it's like you've got Tommy is responsible for killing him, for helping create the mythos of him, and then bringing him back. Like these huge, important things that Jason would not be without Tommy.
Yeah.
But so the reason I say all of this is because this is what I worry about in that Crystal Lake series. Like, because I really do think it's going to be like they're not going to do Jason crawled out of the lake and is a homeless guy on the other side. They're not going to do like, I think it's going to be like each week Jason gets a little spookier. And, you know, like they said there's going to be a lot of flashbacks in it. What are the flashbacks going to be? Like, what is the story here that can grab a hold of this? I think they're going to take it in a supernatural route when in fact the supernatural element in the
Doesn't
series
even come in
does
until
not
6.
start
Yep.
until part 6.
Yep.
Until 6, that is when it becomes supernatural.
Yeah.
So I am very curious. But I love the first two because they are so simple. There is no supernatural element. It's a boogeyman. It's a ghost story. It's very
Yeah.
Michael Myers-y. It's very like there's someone doing something bad, and that is scary. And what a
Yeah.
joy! Like, I mean, there's such an obvious reason why the first movie was the success it was. Why it was this gigantic explosion of a film. I mean, obviously buffeted by that final moment when baby Jason jumps out of the lake and grabs Alice.
Right.
Like that's an all-timer scare. It's like the ending of Carrie where everybody in the whole theater just leaps out of their seats. And I'm close friends with Adrienne King who played Alice in the first two films.
Okay.
And she told me once that she was at a test screening of the film, and at the end of the film, everybody was like, "Oh, this is interesting. This is good." And that moment happened when Jason jumps out of the lake. And she said, not only did everybody jump out of their seats, but every single buyer in the room like got up and left the room immediately to get to a phone to put in an offer. And it's like, exactly, like 100%. Like this is before the movie was coming out. This is before it even had a distributor. You know what I mean? Because originally it was independently produced.
Yeah.
And so you've got all these people sitting in the theater going, this is cool. All right. It's got some gore. It's got all this interesting stuff. Okay. And then all of a sudden that happens. They're like, holy shit, this is going to make a ton of money. And everybody runs. They're like, put in an offer. How much will we pay for it? How much will we pay for it? It's like, yeah, but it's so simple. It's so simple and it's so
right.
sincere. And there's a reason why I've got my Jason tattoo. It's one of those things that to me is truly is comfort food. And to take all of this ridiculousness and all of this silliness that is the Friday series, I can distill it into one thing, which is in early 2019, I was at work and I received a call. It was my mother, and my mother had said, "I'm very sorry to have to tell you this, but your father passed away very unexpectedly this morning." And I, of course, was heartbroken. I didn't know what to do. I was panicked, and so I left work. I came home, and I was hanging out with my wife, and I was just like, "Oh my God, like I'm broken. I can't think. I can't anything." And she said, "It's okay. Like, just let's find things that like can help you breathe and can help you calm down." She said, "What do you want to watch?" And I was like, "You know what? It sounds so silly, but I was like, I want to watch Friday the 13th Part 2." And she was like, you've just had this really traumatic loss. This really sad thing has happened. And she's like, is that what you want to watch? And I said, it is, because these movies aren't scary to me anymore. They are comfort food. They are they're mom's meatloaf to me. Like, I grew up watching these films. These movies are as close to me literally as a home cooked meal by my mom. Every time I pop one of these films on, I feel like I'm a kid again. I feel like I'm in my basement rumpus room in the 80s with my crusty VHS tape that I rented from Hastings Books, Music, and Video. And I'm putting that tape in and I'm kicking back with my friends and popcorn, and I'm just having a blast. And so I put that movie on, and it really did. It was like a solve, and it's so strange to think that, this movie about this homicidal maniac butchering kids actually gave me such solace at such a traumatic, sad point in my life. But it really did. And I mean, I think that's the magic of cinema, not just horror, just everything. Like, it has the ability to transport us. It has the ability to like take us to these beautiful places that we thought we lost, and I felt like I was sitting there, in the basement. My dad's still alive upstairs, telling me to turn it down, and that was exactly what I needed in that moment. And it's not necessarily what I need in every moment, but right then and there,
right
in early 2019, that was exactly what I needed. And goddamn, did it feel good to just kick back and watch Ginny and friends run away from Jason.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that that's the power of film, and that just whatever we're feeling and whatever we need, putting on a good movie, a good comfort movie in moments like that it's perfect. It's there's something to it that no matter what the movie is, like you said, it could be a horror movie, could be something else, and it may seem incongruous, but it is exactly that kind of uh simple thing that you need. And sometimes that's all it is just that little tiny thing that you need that doesn't seem right but is right. And that's cool that worked out so
Yeah,
well for you.
it's a time machine. We should be
Yes, yeah.
grateful that somebody invented them. So
Oh yeah.
it's I mean, I can wax poetic about Friday forever, and especially the first two, because I do love them so much, and I think they're really wonderful films. I'm pacing around my child's nursery right now as I talk to you, and I've got like little cartoony drawings of Jason on the walls, and I've got a plush Jason looking over my desk where I write my films, and I look down at my arm and I've got my Jason tattoo. Like clearly it's a big part of my life, and
Oh
for
yeah.
all of the beautiful things and all of the troubling things about the series, it they're just a joy for me, and they always will be, and I look back on them, and I look back on the choices that they made, and I I always marvel because they're not necessarily the choices I would have made, but
Right.
they're, like I said, they're my comfort food. I mean, one of the things, and I think it's worth bringing up, and it may come up in some of your other shows, is the fact that when Victor Miller wrote the series, he decided to make not necessarily. I mean, Jason doesn't become the killer until the second film, but the fact that Jason is developmentally disabled in some
Yeah.
capacity. We can see he has a physical deformation, and that he is mentally slow in some way. It's never described. Although in the
Right.
second film, Ginny, during that sequence in which she lays everything out, actually refers to him with the R word, where you're just kind of
Yeah.
like, again, this is our heroine referring to Jason, and you're just
Right.
like, oh my god, okay, sure, but
Yeah. Again, it was the
it's
80s
it
and it
it
was a
is
different time.
absolutely, absolutely, and I'm certainly not canceling one of my favorite movies because of it.
Yeah, yeah.
But it is interesting though that you do have this character who is developmentally disabled, and he is a serial killer, and he I the way I've always looked at it is it was a choice that was made in the first film to make the character potentially more sympathetic, in so much
Yes.
as, like, she has lost her son who she really had to care for. And if you recall, in the first film, she was the counselor. They weren't watching him. He had to be watched at all times. And this was their
Yeah.
way of saying, like, he wasn't a quote unquote normal kid. And I don't mean that obviously in a negative way, but like that was her
Yeah,
way of
yeah.
trying to explain without saying it what was up with Jason. And so in the second film, when Jason becomes this lumbering serial killer, it is kind of an interesting thought process that goes into this. Is now we have somebody who is developmentally disabled, who is a serial killer. Is he a serial killer because he's developmentally disabled? No, he's a serial killer
No.
because he's furious at the fact that his mother was killed.
Yeah,
And
he
not only
witnessed his
that, but
mother
he's
being killed.
probably,
Yeah.
yeah, he probably also is pretty troubled from the fact that he spent 20 years living in the woods and pooping into that toilet that has no water in it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I do think that he's probably lost it for a variety of reasons. But again, it is one of those things that I always think it kind of deserves, not necessarily all the airtime, but it deserves recognition, especially as the films go on and he becomes a zombie. And I haven't seen it in a while, but I feel like it is also kind of referenced a bit in Freddy versus Jason, the fact that Jason is disabled. I God, I haven't seen it in a while, and I have no desire to dig back in, but I do feel like even once the film switched companies over to New Line, and they started getting substantially larger budget, this was something that was always kind of noted about the series.
Right.
Is
Yeah.
that Jason is a bit different, and he's an outsider. He's a mess. He's just like all of us. I mean, maybe
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
without the serial killing, but
Right.
he's no, I think there's a reason why we glom onto this character. And I think there's a reason why we have our Jason tattoos, and there's a reason why even back in the '80s there were Jason toys and Jason
Oh yeah.
frisbees and this
Oh,
sort of thing
Jason was
is because I mean,
monolithic in terms of his popularity. I mean,
yeah, yeah, I
Jason
mean
was
it's
huge.
and somehow in the same breath, you had all the Freddy toys as
Yeah.
well, and you're just like, so you've got this child molester, child killer character that you can get a little plushie to put in bed with your kid. It's very interesting, the marketing that was going on in the 80s. But again,
Yeah.
with the Nightmare series, they clearly toned down a lot of what Freddy had done in life and what
Yes.
caused the parents of Springwood to kill him, and suddenly he just kind of became a smack talking goofball character who just shoots
Yeah.
out one liners and chops you up. Um, the antithesis of Jason, who had, I won't say never says anything. I mean, he says "mommy" at the end of part 8, but I think that might be it. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's no, it's a different world, and they're, like I said, the movies are just my favorite. And like I said, I could wax poetic all day and all night, but I'm sure your listeners have probably something better to do than just to hear me repeatedly go, "They're just so good. They're just so good." So I will leave it with these simple words. They're just so good.
No, I agree. I think that you mentioned that with number two, she's laying out the basic premise of what Jason like how Jason has existed and everything up until that point, which is an interesting thing because when going through this yesterday, I was looking up some information and stuff, and I know that when Steve Miner took this over, that he was doing so because Sean Cunningham and all of the rest of them were like, we don't want to have anything to do with this because there's no reason Jason should even be alive. Like, what was he doing this whole time? Blah, blah, blah. And like Steve Miner obviously comes up and goes, okay, well, here's the backstory. This is what happened. And I think that's what eventually pulls Sean
Yeah,
Cunningham back to it too, is that he's like, okay, well, Steve Miner did a good job at recreating this because Steve Miner also gets to do
yeah,
number three. So as much as Steve Miner is
yeah,
creating this Jason mythology with two and three that basically lays the groundwork for that whole series post number one. Like Victor Miller and Sean Cunningham do a great job with number one, but two on is what makes that series, and two specifically, like you said, is what creates everything that we get later on, and it just step by step along the way, just builds from there. And I think that's what's
yeah,
interesting too about the series as a whole too, is that you know for the most part, at least through up to number six, we have a constant through line. The story continues. There's a continuity to the story that is very good. I think that seven and eight are kind of more after Jason's live, they kind of go, okay, well, let's do Jason with a psychic girl, and then let's take Jason out of Crystal Lake. I think that's not necessarily that they're not out of continuity, but more of a let's do something different with them type of deal.
yeah,
And which is great because I like seven and eight just as
yeah,
just as much as the rest of them, and they're fun. But I do think that these first six definitely follow this through line of and get us to what most people think of as Jason, which is interesting because these first four, we'll say one through four, Jason, like you said, is a human. He can be hurt, he can be killed,
yeah.
and he does get killed. And
We see him get injured physically. We see him
yeah,
emotionally damaged.
yeah,
we're seeing an actual person doing
yeah,
this. And yes, of course, there are the extremes, like getting hit in the head with an axe and having your shoulder
yeah,
nearly severed. But
yeah,
you know what? Hey, that's also what movies are for. Movies
yeah.
aren't supposed to be totally real. If you want
You
totally
watch
real,
any
guess what?
action movie,
There's the
the
real
the
world.
hero gets hurt
Yep.
constantly. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and
So
so
we'll
it's
give him a pass. We'll give Jason a
yeah.
pass on that.
Well, and again, I think that like we've said, two, three, and four exist within like maybe a week at most. So he's hurt, but he's still going on that rage and that adrenaline that's just pumping through him the entire time, and he's just killing as many people as he can because that's just what's going on for him. Like he's just like got a singular purpose. He's just go, and it's just it's an interesting concept to that. But eventually, he slows down enough to be killed, and I think that's a when you take that into context,
Yeah.
that 2, 3, and 4 are within just a few days of each other. That when you take that into context, that you understand it a little bit better. And I think that's what I think that's what the remake is trying to do in that way too, as much as it may do it a little haphazardly, is that it's trying to condense the events of 1, 2, and 3 and maybe 4 in a way to show that the events of these first 4 movies, or at least 2, 3, and 4, were all within just a few days. And so
Yeah.
and so I think that's it's pulled off better by 2, 3, and 4. But I think that's why most people get confused, is they're like, oh well, these are just the next year later. No, they're 2, 3, and 4 are all tightly packed together. They're just 1 week. So
Yep.
yeah, it's
Well, and
interesting.
I think one of my other issues with it's Marcus Nispel. I think it's Nispel's the remake requel thing. I think he directed it. Is that it's quite mean. Like the kills in it are some of them are rather torturous. Like the characters actually like get stabbed and are like screaming and begging for their lives and things like that. So some of the kills are like wildly violent. And the thing was, that was also never the Friday series. Like that was never what they were about. I mean, you'd have these kids that they'd have fun, horny sex. They'd walk off into the woods, and I mean, they could get stabbed in the pinky finger, and they would instantly drop to the ground dead. There's no suffering. There's no agony. There's no that wasn't what those movies were about. There's
no real cruelty.
Literally, I mean, no. There was no cruelty to it. And I remember watching part 4, and there's the moment in part 4 where I think the character's name is Rob, is in the basement, and Jason's killing him with like the trowel, and he's screaming. He goes, he's killing me, he's killing me. And I remember that really fucking me up, because I was like, oh my God, this guy is aware that he's being killed. First of all, that's so ghoulish. But secondly, he's cognizant as he's being stabbed, as he's like suffering. And that kill there also feels very out of line with the rest of the series, especially again, the Paramount 8, where most of the time the characters, they don't even have time to get scared in those movies. Like they literally are like walking down a path in the woods, and then it goes poke dead, poke dead, poke dead. That's how those movies work. And I love that. Honestly, like I do not like torture porn. I do not like ultra gratuitous violence. It does nothing for me unless it's comical. Right. Like I can do like Peter Jackson violence and stuff like that.
Evil Deads.
But it absolutely. Like Splatstick totally works for me. I don't want to watch characters get brutally victimized. And I felt like some of the kills in that new Friday felt very out of place with what I had considered the Friday movies. And not only that, but Jason is like, he's created this underground lair. He has like a torture room, and he's got he's got hidden passages, and also it's a very I don't want to say tactical Jason, but it's a Jason who's like I've got all this planned out. This is exactly like, here's my torture room, here's my tunnel that leads to her house, here's my tunnel that leads to his house. As opposed to the Jason I grew up with, who is just this lumbering beast who has no plan at all. He has no plan.
No.
He just walks up to somebody and goes, poke dead, poke dead. That's it.
Yeah.
And again, there was something I found very endearing about that I did not get from that film. That said, again, as I mentioned earlier, I think that Derek Mears was a really good Jason, and I'd love to see him as Jason again. But I'd be very interested in seeing him in a different sort of Jason film, like in a different sort of Friday film, something that felt a little more closer to what I grew up with.
Right. It's interesting to see that in context too, and just to see that and to juxtapose the two, like that, because like we've said, that this Jason in the early films, he is obviously more, from the context of the movies, that he's developmentally disabled and he's just running on rage, on that, people are
Rage. Yeah.
back at this camp, these people who, he sees as the people who killed his mother, that he hadn't even seen or been with for the 20 years between his supposed death and her rampage on the original camp. And so with that, so he's running on that pure rage, whereas, like you said, with this later installment, it's more thoughtful. They kind of take away that special needs aspect of it, that developmentally disabled, and make him more of just a backwoods killer. And
yeah, isn't he like protecting a weed farm also? Like, isn't there some sort of subplot about like
there's some kind of, yeah, I don't know if he's necessarily
I,
protecting it or what. Yeah, it's odd for sure. Yeah. But yeah, the motivations are different. It feels like he's just like somebody's invading his territory in the later one, that, and not in a way that, has context like the originals do. That context of seeing his mother die, and and again, we're getting this as supposition based on what Jenny is saying in the bar, but it does fill in that exposition hole that the franchise needs. So,
yep, 100. Love it.
So,
love it.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that these the franchise as a whole is tons of fun, and it's one of those things, especially with the Paramount 8. They went from 80 to 88. We had 8 movies in the span of 9 years. They just pumped these
God
out.
Bless them.
And and for as wildly what you think of as inconsistent, upon reflection, you realize how consistent the narrative is, at least through 6. And then, I think 7 and 8 kind of just go, okay, well, let's put undead Jason in these 2 different weird scenarios and let's have fun with it. And I think that's what, 7 and 8 did, because number 6 was so good at bringing it back, at bringing audiences back in, and bringing Jason back. They were just like, okay, well, let's just keep throwing Jason into these wild, fun circumstances. Now, especially now that he's undead and can't be killed. So,
well, one thing that I do find kind of interesting about 6, and it's something you might want to mention when you're chatting about it with whatever lucky person gets to talk about it, is that all of the films you've got Friday the 13th Part 2, Friday the 13th 3D, you've got Friday the 13th the final chapter, and so we're going through all these. But when you get to 6, that movie is called Jason Lives, Friday the 13th Part 6. The Jason Lives is actually above the Friday the 13th Part 6. So you could tell that they were very intent on getting their audience back, because 5 was, even though, I mean, it made decent money in the box office, but fans missed Jason. So they very much were like, put Jason's name like 10 times bigger than Friday the 13th Part 6. Like, put Jason Lives like the size of a billboard, and then write Friday the 13th Part 6 in teeny little text underneath it. And I've always kind of loved that about that movie, that the title of that film is Jason Lives, Friday the 13th Part 6. They wanted you back. They wanted you to know Jason was there. And although, honestly, and this is might be grounds for hanging up on me right now, 6 is actually my least favorite of the entire
wow.
8. I saw it in the theater recently, and I had a good time with it. I still think it's still a blast. When I say it's my least favorite of the Paramount 8, it still means I would watch it over 10,000 other films. But I don't actually really love comedy in it. I get what they were trying to do, and I think a lot of it was based on the fact that they were like, there were Jason toys. Kids loved
Yeah.
Jason. Kids like
Yeah.
that was, and I always kind of felt like that was their attempt at like, let's make a Jason movie for the kids. And like opening with the James Bond thing. And
Yeah.
like, I mean, it just, there's all the breaking the fourth wall, like, what do they think I am, a fart head? What did you want to be when you grew up? Like, there's all this sort of stuff where I'm
Yeah.
just like, it, it, it doesn't feel like the earlier films on purpose. Clearly, that's what they were going for. But I
Right.
love the earlier films so much, and it just, it's got giant car chases. It's got that RV flipping over and lighting on fire. It's got stunts. It's the first Friday with gunplay. Like I mean, they're making like
Yeah.
an action movie with that thing. But that wasn't what Friday was to me. Friday was a bunch of kids at camp, and like there were no flipping cars, there were no guns, and there was no Alice Cooper soundtrack. But the thing is, I love all that shit. I love guns. I don't love guns,
Yeah.
but I love guns in movies.
Right. Right. Yeah.
I love car stunts. I love Alice Cooper music. But to me, it was just kind of like, oh, this isn't quite what I fell in love with. I mean, it's the least violent of all the movies. The kills are mostly bloodless, practically. I mean, they're
Yeah.
gory, but like, it's like heart gets ripped out. It happens so quick that there's nary any gore.
No. Yeah. No. Six
And
is
it's
six
the
is
only Friday.
incredibly for and this is something I did bring up. I've already talked to the person for 5 and 6, but I did
Oh, nice.
we did talk about how 5 and 6 are very tame in terms of gore. For that era of what we think of as Friday the 13th, they are, and especially compared to today. Today, you watch any
Oh yeah,
horror movie or slasher, and the gore
you
level
got
is
shit on
incredibly.
network TV, and yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
What you see
absolutely.
in these early
Like,
Jasons, which were decried at the time for being so gory, is stuff you can
it's
get
on
away with
Walking
literally
Dead.
on
Yeah.
television.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, but this is an interesting thing
Yeah.
too, is because I grew up in the 80s. And I was a fan of these movies in the 80s. And horror for me wasn't ever a huge thing, not until the last few years, from for me for 2018 on. I really deep dived into horror. But previous to that, I enjoyed horror. I'd watched a bunch of stuff here and there. But growing up, Freddy was, or not Freddy, Jason was this huge thing. But I think that really was because of 6, 7, and 8 that he got entirely much bigger. He was big up until that point. Don't get me wrong. The movies did well and were a cultural touchstone of the 80s. But I think after 6 or after 5, and we got 6, 7, and 8, that I think that's where he blew up even bigger, the latter part of the 80s. And
Yeah.
and I think that had a lot to do with Freddy coming out. And then we had these characters, Jason and Freddy became these larger than life horror icons in the 80s. And they've continued ever since, but that's where they started, was in that mid to late 80s. And it's I think that's why the movies became, like you said, with number 6, it's almost like a live action cartoon in a lot of ways. It's there's some self-referentialness to it. There's like you said, car chases, gun battles. There's all kinds of stuff that would not be in those, which is not in those earlier Friday movies. And like we said, those earlier Friday movies are very giallo like, more mystery,
Yeah.
and more like hit the killer's hidden throughout, more than anything else, whereas Jason's just lumbering through these later ones. So, and you see him constantly through
Yeah.
these, he's not
Yeah.
hiding in these later ones. So
Not
it's
at all.
interesting.
No, he is front and center. Like
Yeah.
you said, it is his show.
Yeah.
Love it. Oh, bless. Yeah, like I said, you want to wind me up. All we got to do is talk Jason.
Oh man, no, yeah,
Oh, what a pleasure. Cool.
Yes.
Well, this is
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah. Well, I
I'm,
appreciate
I'm
you
glad we
coming
got to.
on.
I'm glad they got to do the hang.
Yeah, yeah. No, I very much enjoyed it. You actually gave me some fun stuff to think about and to talk about in regards to this, and things that I hadn't thought of until we started talking about it, which is always what I love about this show, is being able to talk to somebody and having those interesting ideas pop up that makes me consider the movies in different ways than I had before. So um, that being
That's all I
said,
ask for.
you you did mention that you've got a movie coming out next year. I did see that on your Twitter, Brooklyn 45. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
That is correct. Yeah, Brooklyn 45 is going to be it's a Shutter original. It's going to be so it's going to be appearing on the Shutter streaming platform.
Excellent.
I don't know when, but it is my understanding that it's likely going to be first or second quarter, probably second quarter of 2023.
Okay.
It is a very sad, angry supernatural drama.
Okay.
It is about a group of five old friends, military veterans, who meet in the lounge of a Brooklyn brownstone in the months following the end of World War II.
Okay.
They show up for cocktails, and their very troubled guest, or sorry, their very troubled host, explains to them that he wants to have a seance to try to contact his recently deceased wife. And the doors lock, and things get very, very difficult for everyone in the room.
Wow.
The entire movie is set in the parlor of the brownstone, and it is all in real time. The whole movie takes place over 85 minutes.
Oh wow. Okay.
And by the time they are done with the seance and their hangout, the folks who remain are very, very changed for the rest of their lives. So it's it's a really fun, different movie, and I hope people respond to it. It's not very traditional horror, but at the same time, we are still here in Mohawk. We're not very traditional horror either, and
Yeah.
that's kind of become my thing as a director. It's yeah, it was a real joy. It stars Anne Ramsey, not Anne Ramsey from Throw Mama from the Train and Goonies, because everybody goes, oh, I thought she died. No, Anne Ramsey, who was in A League of Their Own and a bunch of other amazing films.
Okay.
She plays the lead in it. She's absolutely wonderful. Jeremy Holm, who plays the titular Ranger in Jen Wexler's The Ranger, is in
Okay.
it. Ezra Buzzington from the Hills Have Eyes remake, and he was also the bad guy in my film Mohawk, is also there. This character actor from Chicago named Ron Rains, who's absolutely amazing. It's his first time in a big feature, or rather a big role in a feature. He's best known for some internet videos that he's done for The Onion over the years that are absolutely fantastic. Christina Klebe from Rob Zombie's Halloween and a bunch of other stuff. Kind of one of our modern horror scream queens is there, and as I mentioned earlier, the great Larry Fessenden also shows up. So those are the folks stuck in the parlor, and it's a it's a joy. We shot it basically this time last year. We've had
Okay.
a really great opportunity to spend a long time in post on it and really tweak it and turn it into exactly what we want. And yeah, I really can't wait for the world to see it.
That's awesome. It sounds very interesting, and I will definitely be checking it out.
Can't wait. Can't wait.
All right. Can you tell people where they can find you around the internet?
Yeah, easiest way to find me is currently on the dumpster fire that is Twitter.
Yeah.
At It's at Ted Geoghegan. That's TedGeoghegan. Much easier to say than it is to spell.
Yeah.
I'm also on Instagram. You can just search for Ted Geoghegan. And that's about where I live. Is find me there and argue about Friday the 13th with me, or tell me that you saw one of my movies, and we'll have a digital high five.
There you go. Yeah. If anybody in the audience has a disagreement about what he said about Friday the 13th, go take it up with him.
Oh, if you've got it, well, we're gonna throw down, audience.
There you go.
I look forward to it.
All right. Well, I appreciate you coming on, and thank you very much.
Hey, thank you. I really appreciate it. What a joy. Hopefully, we'll talk to you
Yes.
soon.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks again to Ted for joining me and starting this new series off right. On the next episode, Preston Fossil returns to join me in talking about Friday the 13th, parts 3 and 4, the final chapter. Thanks for listening. If you liked what you heard, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app or at creepyandgeeky.com. You can follow the podcast on social media at Creepy and Geeky on both Twitter and Instagram. If you'd like to follow me, I'm Geek Thulu on Twitter and geek.thulu on Instagram. You can support the podcast by ordering teas and more from our TeePublic page. All of the links are in the show notes. Finally, don't forget, stay creepy.